Hello everyone, my name is Steve Kehoe and I'm here today to give you a quick introduction to Meteor.js. Let's start with what Meteor is. Meteor is a web app framework that's built on top of Node.js. This means that we're going to be able to use JavaScript code to write the client and server side of a web application. Meteor is ideal for rapid prototyping and can be compiled for iOS and Android using built-in Cordova support, which will allow us to easily test our designs on multiple platforms. Meteor also uses something called Distributed Data Protocol, which is a fancy way of saying that Meteor automatically is going to keep our server and client side synchronized. Really comes in handy for things that have a real-time aspect like chat applications or other things where you need data to be pushed in real time, but you don't want to write all the extra logic to do that. Meteor also builds in many best practices in terms of programming patterns, whether this be controller model view type patterns or best practices and how you interact with the database and your collections. Meteor kind of gives you a nice framework to do that within while still giving you all the control that you would need and flexibility if you have to go under the covers and use more native Node.js type features. So just to get set up for Meteor, and I'm going to also attach a PDF to this video so you can download this slideshow and get these links. You're going to need to download and install Node.js at the link right there. You're also going to need to install Meteor.js. I also suggest that when you download Meteor, at the end of the installation process, it allows you to create a Meteor account. This is really going to come in handy down the road while you're developing because Meteor offers a free development server where you're going to be able to publish your projects. So sign up for that at the end of the installation process. You're also going to want to download a text editor or IDE of your choice. There's 3 options here that I'm listing. There's also many other options you could use. My personal favorite is WebStorm. WebStorm is free for students for 1 year. It costs $99 if you want to use it for commercial use or other purposes. I realize that not everybody is going to either have a student ID or student email address, I should say, to get WebStorm. So I'm going to be using the next one, Atom Text Editor, which is open source and completely free, and it's probably the next best choice. And then Sublime Text Editor actually has been a long time favorite IDE, or I should say text editor for Meteor. So that's another option. I'm also going to post a few resources here that you can check out later if you like. One is the free tutorial on Meteor's website, where this will be a much more in-depth, this video is just really an introduction to Meteor. This will be a much more in-depth tutorial if you want to learn more. If you want to go even deeper, there's a book called Discover Meteor, which is an ebook that gives you a Git repository project to follow. It costs $30, but if you really want to learn Meteor and you want to take it to the next level, I highly recommend that book. It's a $30 well spent. And finally, there's a link right here to the Meteor documentation, so if you want to look up any of the concepts we cover in a couple minutes, it's all in there somewhere. All right, so let's leave PowerPoint now and actually create a Hello World Meteor project. Oh, that was my PowerPoint troubles from earlier. Okay, so we're going to CD to a directory where we want to put our Meteor project. For me, it's in my Documents folder in a folder called Meteor Dev, but you can really, this project can go in any folder, it's up to you. So we're going to switch to this directory. To create a new Meteor project, it's pretty simple. You just type Meteor, create, and then the name of your project. We'll just call this one Hello World. Keep in mind that I've already gone through all the installation steps, so Meteor is already installed on this computer. If you try to run this before you download Node.js and Meteor, you'll get an error. If everything completes successfully, you'll see this little advice here to type CD to change directory to your Hello World directory that you just made. And then you can just type Meteor to run it. Meteor knows that when you just type Meteor on its own, what you really mean is Meteor run, but we're going to do this the right way and actually run the project. So now we're starting the Meteor project. So behind the scenes here, just to give, for those of you newer to web applications in general, what's happening here is the code that was generated for us, which we're going to look at in a minute, is being compiled by Meteor. It's then going to start MongoDB as our database, which came packaged with Meteor, so you don't have to set up your own database server or anything, every new project you make is going to have its own local MongoDB server packaged with it. And once you see this app running at localhost :3000, you know that your web server is up and running. So let's actually go to this link here and see what a new Meteor project looks like. All right, so we've got a pretty plain website here with a welcome to Meteor message and a simple button that says click me. So I guess we'll oblige this button and see what it does. And each time we click, it's going to increment. Okay, so pretty simple app. Let's take a look at what's going on here behind the scenes. So I'm going to open Atom text editor here. Let's open, what you'll want to do is navigate to where you made that Meteor directory. I went into my documents folder, into Meteor dev, and let's see, where is it? Hello world, right here. So I just select the folder and I open the folder, so that essentially tells Atom to open the entire project. So we've got a Meteor folder here. For those of you familiar with OS X, the period means it's a hidden folder. That's kind of out of the scope for today, but a lot of the project settings are contained in this folder. A lot of what Meteor uses to build your app is in here. And we have 3 files that it generated for us. For those of you who have done web development before, you'll see the familiar HTML file, CSS, and JavaScript. So let's look at the HTML file to start. We'll see here that there's a head tag with just the title, Hello World, which was the name of our project. And then in the body, we have welcome to Meteor. And then for those of you who do know HTML, this might look a little weird, and it should, because this is Meteor's built-in spacebar syntax. Now, what spacebars is a syntax that allows you to insert HTML templates dynamically into an HTML document. So this is how, instead of just hard-coding one singular HTML page, we can make dynamic pages that are going to be driven off of a database that have maybe the same layout, but will change depending on the data we have. In this case, a pretty simple example. This is basically saying insert a template named hello. As you can see right down here, we have a template whose name is hello that we define. We define a button called click me, and then it says you've pressed the button counter times. So we'll come back to counter in a second. One thing I do want to point out, if you see here, this is curly brace, right arrow, and this is the syntax for inserting a template. Down here, where it's just open 2 curly braces, close 2 curly braces, that means either insert a variable that's in the context of this template, or insert a function call. And in fact, we'll see in a second that counter is indeed a function. Just to go back to the website and make sense of this again for a second, you see here we have welcome to Meteor, then we're inserting this template, so what you should see is under welcome to Meteor, the button and the counting, you've pressed the buttons counter times. So indeed, we see that Meteor has inserted the hello template right under the welcome to Meteor. Okay, great. So let's look at this hello world.js. This is where most of the other starting boilerplate is. You'll notice up here we've wrapped this entire block of JavaScript in a, well, actually up here in a if meteor.isClient block. Now, one of the unique things about Meteor that we talked about earlier is that it's written entirely in JavaScript, and so the client and the server side are JavaScript code. This is great because we only have to use one language, we only have to maintain our project in one language. Unfortunately, in this simple example, Meteor doesn't know, is this code that should be run on the client, should it be run on the server, or in many cases you have library functions that need to be on the client and the server. Wrapping the code in this block means this will only run on the client. This block, which is empty, would have code that's only run on the server. And actually, if it's run in meteor.startup here, this would be code that's run at the startup of the application. So let's focus on the client code here. The first thing we're doing is accessing a session variable. So a session variable is a variable that will carry from page to page as a user navigates through your website. In this case, we only have one page, but let's say we had multiple pages. And let's say a user logged into their user account. You would put something like their login token into a session variable so that as they go from page to page, the user doesn't have to log in every time. So it's kind of a way of setting a global variable across your application. Other variables would leave as soon as you navigated away from the current page. So here we're setting a variable named counter, and we're setting it to its value to 0. We're also going to introduce you to helper functions right here. So Meteor has this nice template library called Blaze that it uses, and we saw the spacebar syntax over here in the HTML file where we were actually inserting a template. But what this is actually defining is a Blaze template. Its name is hello. Because we have a template named hello, over in this JavaScript file, we can use the universal template class here, type period hello, the name of our template, period helpers, and then pass a JSON object or a JavaScript object into that function call. And the keys of the object are going to be the names of helper functions we want to define. So this is actually the counter that we're referencing here. So we're defining over in the JavaScript file a helper function named counter. That's the key. The value is actually the function we want to execute. So what this represents is us getting the session variable we set up here. So in the beginning, when the page loads, the default value is 0. This function is going to return session.getCounter. It's going to return 0. So just like we saw, and actually let's just reload the page again. When we load the page, we have 0 right here. Okay, now here's the other important part. Here we have a similar starting syntax, template.hello, and then .events. Now here, what we're doing is we're attaching a click event listener. So this means whenever somebody clicks a particular element in our HTML page, we're going to want to execute the function on the right-hand side. In this case, we're attaching a click listener to the button. The button is right here, the click me button. You could be referencing for those of you that know CSS, you could be referencing using a CSS selector, an ID of an element or a class of an element. In this case, we only have one button, so we can just reference button. The function is we're going to get session.set. We're going to set counter, the variable we've been working with so far. And before we set counter, we're actually going to call session.getCounter, and we're going to add 1. So this is where we're incrementing the counter one by one. Now, one of the interesting things you may have noticed is there's no code here that's calling this helper function over and over again. This is when I said earlier that Meteor is reactive. It's reactive when the database updates. In this case, we're not using the database, we're using a session variable, but the session variable is also reactive. So every time we click this button and we set the counter to be +1, in this HTML template where we have this curly brace, counter, curly brace, counter is going to keep getting called every time, and actually I shouldn't even say that, every time the session variable is updated, it's almost like this piece of HTML has subscribed to that session variable and updates will be pushed. So that's why you see this nice functionality here where magically the template keeps updating when this is clicked. And there's actually no server-side code really running here other than the basic web server. So that's our introduction to our Hello World Meteor here. We're going to be having some more classes on the BitTiger platform going deeper into different aspects of Meteor, but I wanted to do a short video here to give you a feel for the different tools you're going to need to run a Meteor application and the very basic layout of the Hello World Meteor application. Thanks for tuning in, and come back for more.